Go.
No, actually, this is a good evening. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Empower Multimedia. I'm here with a very, very special guy, one of my really close friends and business partner, Kevin Fedor. I'm going to let him introduce himself, like a little, real quick intro, and then we'll get into the discussion.
Well, thank you, brother. As you said, we're close friends. By the way, I just want to say I'm honored to be your first guest. Hopefully, I'll be a repeat guest in the future, but I'm sure you're going to have some incredible people on. So, yeah, just to intro me a little bit. Born in Portugal, half my family's there. I sort of grew up in a bit of an athlete household. Dad played pro sports in Portugal, and my grandfather played actually a short stint in the NBA, but he quit to make more money as a teacher. So that tells you how long ago that was.
Mm.
But yeah, I just grew up. Sports were always a big part of my life. And then when I was young, about 5 years old, moved to Florida, which is basically where I grew up in sort of the Orlando area. And then went to school at USF in Tampa, which is actually how we met. And yeah, basically, since then, I've kind of been doing a bunch of different projects and working on a lot of exciting stuff, which I'm sure we'll get into. And currently, during this pandemic, residing in NYC, which I moved here late last year, which is an interesting time to move to an urban area, but so far it's been as enjoyable as it could be. So I'm not complaining.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you for that. Just so everybody knows, this whole conversation is going to be revolving around how we built a social media agency while in college, and kind of like just the process of that. I'm going to really just deep dive into Kevin's head and get into his mindset, and really just kind of get to understanding, like, one, how to build an agency, two, how we did it while in college, full-time students, and then three, just like everything that encompasses like running a full-time business, because it was a legitimate business. And we're just going to see, like, hopefully this could help bring a lot of value to the audience and any aspiring entrepreneurs out there. Hopefully this, helps you take the leap of faith. So
For
to get
sure.
started, Kevin, can you tell us, I know you harped on it a little bit, but can you tell us about your background, your educational background?
Yeah. So went to school at USF, like I mentioned. I actually came in as an architecture major. I think a lot of us, and I'm sure some people listening will identify with this, don't really know what we want to do, right? I always envied people that when they were young, when they were 5 years old, they said, I want to be a doctor, and they ended up becoming one. I think that's like such an advantage in life to know exactly what you want at such a young age, because you can put like all of your mental focus on that.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of unfortunately had a lot of things I was passionate about. So I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And architecture was something that I thought was interesting and cool. And I needed a lot of different talents to be good at it. I actually took some architecture courses, like did quite well. But oddly enough, I think one theme that might come up in this conversation is sometimes the universe sort of tells you the direction you should be going. And that's kind of what happened to me. So long story short, I had like 3, 4, 5 professors, architects, like people in the industry that I was hoping to kind of jump into, kind of tell me like, hey, I think you're going to be great at this, but you might be better served even another place because I think you're a talented kid. And at the time I was 17, 18, 19-year-old kid and really didn't understand what that meant or like what they saw in me or what they were talking about. But after enough people telling me that, I thought, well, hey, maybe I should explore what they're talking about. So long story short, I ended up kind of converting over to business, ended up at finance. Thought process behind that was, well, if you're going to get a business degree, I think it's better to learn the numbers and know the people than learn the people and try to catch up. And it's tough to learn the numbers in the future, I think. So rather than get like a marketing or a management degree, I went the finance route. I've always been pretty good at numbers. Graduated with a decent GPA, we'll say. And yeah, so that's kind of my background, which is funny because the entire conversation we're about to have is going to be surrounded about marketing, which I have zero true education around besides kind of like being self-taught. But I think that's going to be, like I said, a major theme. And if you want me to be honest, my real education background is Google and YouTube. So I know you and
Yeah,
I are in the same boat when it comes to this, but somebody watching this on YouTube right now, I think you're going to get a lot more actual practical advice that you can use on a day-to-day basis in your career and in your future from this than you would if you take 4 courses or 5 courses a semester in college. Not to say college isn't important, but I think that if you stop at your education just being in college, it's going to be tough for you to progress.
interesting, interesting. So you started off in architecture and then you kind of migrated into finance. Did you get any like internships or anything like that? What pivoted you? I guess my next question for you is like, when did you know you wanted to take the entrepreneur route? Like, what pivoted you towards that?
Yeah, so it's funny you mentioned internships because that's kind of what inspired it. So
Oh,
I
really?
definitely wasn't. It's funny because I've wrestled with this, and like if people out there watch like Gary Vee or other like famous entrepreneurs, there's always this debate around like, are entrepreneurs born? Like, is that like part of your DNA? And in some cases, I mean, I had a little bit of that hustle. Like when I was a kid, I used to make like duct tape wallets and sell it. I used to always be sort of a hustler for money and like stuff like that. So I definitely had those tendencies, but I actually really wasn't like a lemonade stand kid, which is something that I always think about. Like I think business was always around me, and I grew up around some successful people, whether it was like just kind of like family or mostly like my friends' parents and stuff like that. So I sort of saw what success was at a young age, but I never really had the entrepreneurial bug until I did an internship about halfway through college. And I did an internship at a company called Bags, which is like basically this transportation services company, if you will. And I was just kind of doing BS work, right? Like a lot of
Mhm.
beginning internships are. Um, and I think it was valuable in a lot of ways. It was my first like 9 to 5 experience, my first sort of like corporate get inside, like wear the slacks and the button down shirt and the jacket. Like, so I did all that. And there were aspects to it that I liked. I liked the hustle. I liked the idea of like putting in the work. I liked the camaraderie of like working together with people. I also like the idea of like an organization, but I thought I was being super underutilized.
Mhm.
I noticed that like my work ethic was much more than the other interns. So I basically sort of there kind of got the idea of like, maybe I should sort of listen to this like entrepreneurial bug and try something. I mean, this is the perfect time as far as like in college. So basically what ended up happening was I had at that point for months wrestled with this idea of starting a podcast, oddly enough.
Mhm.
And I discovered podcasts like earlier that year, fell in love with them. To shout out one podcast in particular, it was a sports podcast called Jalen and Jacoby with Jalen Rose.
I see.
Um,
Mhm.
yeah, so I just fell in love with it and the conversation and how easy it was, and I could listen to it passively while still doing stuff. And I was thinking to myself, like, this can't be that hard to do. Like, it's a microphone and a recording. I mean, it's what we're doing now. Like, even at that time, like, it seemed so simple. In some cases, I didn't know what I was getting into, but it was easy enough to grasp that I felt like I could take the leap of faith, and it wasn't so daunting. So I had another pivotal. You might not even know this, and I know we've talked a lot about these conversations, but I actually had a friend. To shout out my buddy Nick. We were in Chipotle, and I'll actually never forget this. So I'd wrestled with this idea of starting a sports podcast and like featuring my friends and guests and maybe people in my life, whatever. Um, and he was one of the people that I had in mind. So he was the first person that I told truly of like, hey, I have this idea of like doing this podcast, like by a young guy for young people, and kind of like a fresh take, if you will.
Mhm.
And he loved it. And he was like, he super supported me to the point where it actually gave me like ammo and juice to like seek it through. And that's exactly what happened. So to kind of answer your question, really it hit me like midway through college, and my life has been very different from like an impact and mission standpoint ever since.
That's crazy. So, okay. So, like, when you said your internship was like the beginning, is it that you hated what you're doing so much? Like, okay, like, I can't. there has to be more to life than this, or like what really did you hate about it?
Yeah, so I definitely feel like people who are entrepreneurs or have entrepreneurial tendencies, like there's a debate in the entrepreneur community. I always think of like people want to become entrepreneurs because they don't want to work for somebody else. I'm actually not really like that. Like I think you're probably even more like that than me. Like I actually don't really have an issue with working for somebody. Even though I think I have an alpha personality and uh, I enjoy being a leader, but I don't necessarily have to be top dog. I think what that internship experience exposed me to was like feeling guilty about not reaching my potential. And it sort of exposed me to like, I'm developing all of these hours. Like what it really like made me realize was I was working, literally 9 to 5 every day, right? Like a lot of us, end up doing. And my days where I would go home, I was actually taking some summer courses as well. So outside of like playing soccer with some buddies on the weekend, I really like my weeks were going by so fast and I felt like I wasn't really doing anything. So it ended up being sort of like a wake up call for me of like, man, is this what like the rest of my life is going to look like? Kind of in the middle of college and being that first like corporate experience, I was like, I want to be successful and I want to work hard and like do something that I'm proud of, but this isn't a formula for me. So I was
Yeah,
putting a lot of time into something that wasn't like serving me. And that's what kind of really woke me up to maybe I need to do something that's a little bit more left field.
that's crazy. And to like piggyback off of that, um, honestly, man, I think that's the issue with a lot of like college students like going in the workforce. It's not necessarily their fault, but a lot of the internships that they do get are like useless. Like they're not really learning anything. They kind of felt like what you did, like, okay, I'm doing this internship, I'm not really gaining like tangible skills, which is really hurting them because when they graduate, they basically come out with nothing, just other than the degree. Now, some of the internships that do offer skills are very, very vital. But a lot of the internships actually don't offer skills. So I completely understand where you're coming from with that. And another good thing that you mentioned, which I wanted to re-harp on, is having solid people in your corner. Not everybody's gonna just say like, "Oh no, yeah, man, like you should do it," and like juice you up to do something. So just having solid and quality people in your corner is just gonna make that much of a difference. Anything else you want to mention?
Yeah, no, I mean, there's always that saying of like, you're the sum of the five people you hang out with the most. Big believer in that. And I think, to get a little bit personal, right around that same time period, I actually was dating somebody for a while and we split. And I never viewed that as like it was holding me down, but it's no secret that ever since that happened, I was really just able to kind of come into my own and like focus on what everything I wanted to do and found success in that. So not to say like you can't date somebody and try stuff entrepreneurially or anything like that. In fact, I think it can be quite the opposite. I think having a support system is vital. I just think sometimes people need to monitor their circle a little bit, and it doesn't mean you have to cut somebody or like force somebody to be closer. But I think if you're talking to somebody that is a cancer in your life or is just bringing negativity, rather than talking to them once a week, talk to them once a month. And that right there is a tangible difference. So yeah, I'm a big believer in that. And I've definitely like admire the people, I mean, yourself included, that have been able to be a great support system for me. And I think it's like category one when it comes to having any success and doing something on your own.
Yeah, man. I don't really have much to add to that, but quality people, keep them in check with you. I guess now that we talked about your education, talked about your background a little bit, talked about like what like triggered like, okay, I kind of want to do this. So like, how did Follow Spike, which is a social media agency that we started? So how did that get started exactly?
Yeah, I mean, look, feel free to jump in here because you're as much of that process as I was. But I mean, I think it really started the reason. So I brought up that podcast, right? And what basically happened is I did it pretty religiously for about 6 months.
Mhm.
which I think is an important thing to say, right? Like I didn't just start and stop like a couple weeks later or something like that. Like I was like every week an episode came out. It was an hour long, different guests each time. Things were pre-planned, and I didn't just do the podcast. Like I really wanted to make a full suite. So I
Mhm.
learned how to build a website. I learned how to start social media channels. I learned how to market myself organically. Like I learned all these things that had nothing to do with actually coming up with sports topics to talk to my friends and interview people with, but I ended up learning skills and things outside of that, which really at the end of the day, like financially, the podcast wasn't a big success, but personally, it was a massive success. And it was able to propel me to what ended up being actually somewhat of a pretty big financial success. Like uh, the most successful thing from the podcast was my social media following. So I ended up building an audience of about 10,000 people in the matter of 5, 6 months.
Mhm.
And
Organic. Organic. You got to be
completely
organic.
organic,
Yeah.
right? I mean, look, I was a broke college kid. I didn't have money to put into ads or whatever. Like I was just telling a bunch of friends to follow and like engage and like begging them to do so. But I don't have 10,000 friends. I'm not that popular. So I really was able to kind of take the same sentiment, bring it to social, and had some success with it. I mean, in a lot of ways, I was throwing stuff at the wall. Like I didn't know 100% what I was doing, but I think that's like a common theme when you're starting something entrepreneurially is like everything is just trial and error. And eventually you'll just get a little bit smarter. And if you connect with people that have either done it before or going through the same things you are, you might be able to not make as many mistakes. So yeah, so what ended up happening is I ended up kind of developing skills in social without realizing it. And then couple that with two other major things that happened that birthed Fall Spike. So I met you. So I'll tell that story, which I always think is like a euphoric moment. But so Carl and I actually had a class together for like 4 or 5 straight semesters and never spoke a word to each other, which by the way is one thing that if I could like get anything through and like this like large piece of content is you need to as much as possible like connect with the people around you, especially if you think they might be like-minded. Unfortunately, I didn't sort of take that leap of faith and connect with you until like semester 5. So which is so funny. But we ended up being in an entrepreneurship minor class together. So I was like, okay, we've had so many other courses together. We have this very like uh, sort of selective class, if you will, together. This guy can't be like super different from me. So we were sitting in opposite sides of the room. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was a class that was the final one of the day, so it ends at like 9:30. And I told myself, okay, after class, I'm just gonna go up to him, introduce myself, that sort of thing. And oddly enough, I think he had the same exact mentality because we sort of met literally in the middle of class, introduced each other, and just we literally just started talking about what we were doing, what we were up to, things that we wanted in life. And I never met you, so
Yeah.
it was kind of a beautiful moment. And we literally stayed there for like 2.5, 3 hours until like the doors locked on us and the school kicked us out like at midnight. And the most like just the funniest thing I always think about and reflect on that moment is we had this like stars aligning sort of experience, and then your car was in the shop that day, so you were going to Uber home, and I was going to offer to give you a ride if you were like on my side of the town or something. And so I said, so what area do you live? And you told me like your apartment complex, and I was like, that's where I live. And so it was like we literally both at the
Yeah.
same time pulled out our key, and it was the same key card. And we were just laughing because we are like, man, if this wasn't like a like in your face, one of those like universe telling you moments,
Mhm.
I don't know what is. So that was a huge moment, right? We hit it off and basically like really literally, I think in our very first conversation decided like, hey, like either you or I can't remember, said like, hey, if you ever want to work on something together, like let me know. I'd love to. And
Yeah.
that's such actually a crazy thing, right? Like because that ended up changing my life without even understanding. And I think you'd probably say the same. Like
Yeah.
it was one of those universe moments, and sometimes it just literally throws you in the face. So be receptive. So that was another major layer. And then the third major layer was one of my best friends, Andrew Wade, played high school basketball with him and still talk to him every week. Um, he had been interning for a social media company. And I found it kind of interesting because it was it was a super much so like a startup, and I didn't even really know what that was or looked like. Like I had a weird disconnect between like a company and and like a little like mom and pop or like you starting something. Like I never really understood what that transition looked like, or I've never seen it really before. So the reason why I bring that up is because he was literally a part of that process for them. So he came on as like person number 11 or something like that, and was just an intern, and I think like very marginally paid, if paid at all. And he basically told me of like what they were doing, and they were basically growing like Instagram pages for businesses and brands. I was like, "God, that's really interesting," because as you know, you guys have heard, like I had started building some skills on that. So I was like, how do they do it? And I kind of like got to learn a little bit more, and without throwing weight under the bus, like maybe he told me a couple things I shouldn't have known, but at the end of the day, it just gave me confidence. Like, it's, I told him literally the day one that he got the internship, I was like, let me know how that goes, because I feel like I could do a version of that. Long story short, I had met you really around the time period that he starts finishing his internship, and the CEO of that company goes from making 40 grand a year, which is respectable, to 40 grand a month.
Mm,
Literally, they 11x over a 3 month period.
that's crazy.
And it was like an indicator for me. I was like, okay, I have skills in this. I think it's a really interesting concept. And there's some financial opportunity here. Maybe this is the thing. And so I remember it very vividly. Like you and I would literally spend, since we figured out we lived in the same complex, we would go to like the sort of community area of our complex and just say good, bad, horrible ideas about things we could work on together. And I remember we had like a pretty long list. Like
We
you
did.
know me, I have a list in my phone of just like business ideas. I still have it and still add to it on a pretty regular basis. And so I just shared with you a lot of my different ideas. And I remember, just to throw out some, we talked about a t-shirt subscription company. I remember we talked about like combining a microwave
The fridge.
and a
Fridge.
mini fridge for like
Yeah.
college students. We just like we threw out a ton of ideas, and I think that's like a major thing, right? Like we didn't know at the time what it was going to be, and I think that's the beautiful thing is you just got to keep throwing stuff out. And again, sometimes the decision's kind of going to be made for you, and kind of the stars will align eventually. So what ended up happening was I sort of get word that that company blows up. We started looking into it. You start developing like a lot of your skills in social, and we can tell that story of like how almost overnight you were able to just like blow my mind with what you were able to accomplish.
Yeah.
Um, but basically, kind of Fall Spec was born. Like once you and I think not to say like we were just solely financially driven, but like there's just a lot of question marks when it comes to like creating a business with the idea of like it being something that was going to be able to sustain us maybe after college, I think was our dream. So with that, we wanted some security in that there'd be some financial opportunity that we could pursue. And I think once we understood that was there, that's really when Follow Spike was born.
Yeah. To kind of like add on to what Kevin mentioned, one when he was referring to like a coming of age or like universe telling you moment. What's kind of funny is I don't know if Kevin remembers this, but the first out of the 5 classes that we were a part of, the first one we actually had to pitch an entrepreneurship like concept, and I don't remember what you pitched, Kevin, but I know I pitched something about like a laundry service for college students, and you, for some reason, you always brought that up because you thought it was like, oh, that's not a terrible idea to be honest. But the fact that like we started off in a class that like started off like entrepreneurship related, and then the class that he's talking about, like our 5th class, it was with a professor that was very helpful to us, Jim. Shout out to Jim. And I remember this specifically, like in the beginning of that class, because it was the first class of that semester. He said, because Jim's always trying to get gears rolling. He said like, hey, like connect with people with like maybe somebody in this class you might start a business with. And I remember me and Kevin looking at each other like, all right, and we got to talk to each other. Because like he mentioned, like it was like 4 times in a row. This is the 5th time. So something's up. And like everything that he mentioned was true. Had the same key card, the same complex, things like that. Um, and a little bit of background about me is I know he was building a following too. But what's crazy was when we both met, we were kind of doing our own thing. And it wasn't like, you know how some people are, you know, you can attest to this. Some people are like, oh, I kind of want to, you know, do this, but they don't have nothing to show for it. We both actually had something to show for it. Me
Right.
with APD, and I was like trying to, I was a completely different route of this podcast. Like I was literally trying to do a venture where I would have to require funding. So I was literally in the process of like figuring out how to get funding like by myself. Because it was told to me by Jim that this project I'm trying to do is not going to cost me like 100,000 like I was hoping. It's going to be more so in the millions. So I'm like, God damn. So I was like out there pitching, like I was like busting my ass, like pitching the idea, and I'll start. And I'm not a person to fool myself. Like I was starting to get to the realization is like, this is gonna. If I were to be successful in this is not gonna take me like 1-2 years. It would take me like 7-10 years, and I kind of want to do something. If I wanted to taste the entrepreneurship route, I wanted to taste something that I could see like way quicker ROI in what I'm doing, and which kind of like brought back us to like us brainstorming and why we picked that fest. Like we both had experiences and growing social pages, um, and when he brought when he talked about his friend Wade, I was just like, and he told me about the 11x story. I was like, 11x, god damn. And then he told us like they're basically growing Instagram pages, and I'm like, we both do that shit right now for free for ourselves. So like, why not? So that's kind of like how it started. Unless you remember anything else differently than that.
No, I mean, yeah, you definitely added in a couple of details that I missed, but yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, it was just like a lot of things sort of came in at once, and I don't remember if there was an actual specific day that where we were like, this is what we were gonna do, but we basically fell into it, and I think once we put all the pieces together, like the conversation changed. It was a lot more like, okay, how do we do this? Like, how do we put this together? Like, what would this look like? What do we sell exactly? How do we differentiate ourselves? Which is a whole nother like conversation and process that took its own time and like super necessary and a lot of growing pains and mistakes and learning. But yeah, 1,000%.
And to kind of like piggyback, like why we pick social media, I think Kevin and I can both attest to this. One, we were both college students with not a lot of money. Two, we were both college students with not a lot of money, and we knew how to grow social media pages, so we wanted to pick something with very little overhead that we could like actually operate with, and I think that was like one of the major reasons, other than that we already had the skill sets.
Yeah,
Of
yeah.
why.
If I could jump in on that, like people a lot of times ask me, like, I'm interested in, trying an entrepreneurial thing or starting something of my own, but I'm not creative, which I always find it to be an interesting excuse because I felt like that probably at one point too. But what was an unlock for me and maybe is an unlock for you, and you heard me mention it like with ideas on my phone, I I sort of force myself to be creative from a business standpoint. Like I used to do exercises where I would literally write ideas down, and like 90% of them would be awful. But like I think it's a lot like what I think would it would be like to be a musician or an artist, where I just need to get out songs, and like I need to get out the bad songs till I get to a good one. And I need
Mhm.
to get out a bunch of good ones till I get to a great one. And I think that process, you start to like build your creativity. And then the other thing I was going to say is when it comes to you being able to come up with ideas, which I have actually a story about that. So one of our classes that we did, I don't know if you remember this, but one of our first exercises, maybe our very first exercise, was our professor was like, okay, take out a piece of paper. Uh, you have like 1 minute or something like that, and write down 5 business ideas,
Yeah.
right? And or maybe he said 3 or something, right? Let's just say for the story it was 5. So then he goes, he tells everybody stop and put your pens down, blah blah. And then he was like, okay, how many people wrote 0? And there was like a good amount of hands up. How many people wrote 1? And kind of like fewer and fewer each one, till I got to 5. And I wrote like 12. And And then it was interesting. I was the only person that did more than 5. And there was a couple people that did 4 or 5. And that was like an unlock for me because I never considered myself a creative person, but that was like the singular moment where I was like, man, maybe I can come up with stuff. And like I said, like those 12 ideas, I guarantee you all 12 of them were awful, but it was just, I was already starting to work on that muscle. And I think creativity is a lot like a muscle, and you can work it out just like a bicep or a hamstring. So that was going to be one thing I was going to say. And then when you have ideas and you're trying to pick the one, I think you have to look at, and I forget who told us this. I think we were talking to him during the same time, but an entrepreneur that ended up being sort of a part of another class or something that we did. But he always said, like, you sort of use like a Venn diagram, sort of show 3 circles. You need to find what's in the middle. And the 3 circles were what you're passionate about, what you have skills in, and then where there's actual opportunity. So money or finances, right?
Yep.
And if you can find an idea with all 3, you're in a really good spot. So I think that's what we figured out, and why we were like, when we figured it out, we jumped on it. And that takes some time. For some people, that could take a lot of time. For some people, that, it comes a little bit more natural. But yeah, it's definitely a integral process to starting out.
One thing I want to mention before we move on to the next question is, especially that first class was, man, when I tell you, I was kind of disappointed in the fact that, one, it was an entrepreneurship class, and I realized that a lot of people in there were just taking it just to take it. But when we were doing this like project where we had to come up with an idea of like a business venture they wanted to start. And when I tell you, man, there was like at least 3 or 4 that I could think of that was like, damn, that's a goddamn good idea. I remember one specifically, this girl made something about the contacts, um, and like how it was related to contacts. But I just remember I'm like, damn, that makes perfect sense the way she explained it and like why it would be a great opportunity. But I was just so disappointed that like no one jumped or like
Followed through.
followed through. It's all in the follow through, guys. Like if you could talk all you want, but if you don't even attempt to do something, like you're just like, you're gonna kick yourself in the ass after. Now, granted,
Yeah.
Kevin and I were kind of lucky because, one, we don't have any responsibilities other than like school at the time. Like we both have families that were supporting us. But for the most part, if you are in our shoes, college is probably the best time for you to attempt to start something because of the very low risk and responsibility factor in it. Because if you fail, you fail. Like there's nothing to say. And you don't have anyone else like you that's really relying on you. Now, in terms of just that class, like some people are just might be just like discouraged about things. But I always tell Kevin this: like I will never say an idea is terrible ever since. And I remember this like it was yesterday in middle school. This thing called silly bands, which were like animal shaped rubber bands.
Yeah.
And I never bought one. Like I remember I never bought one because I thought it was dumb. But a lot of people bought them, and it
Me
made
included.
millions, millions. And me personally, if someone like would have came to me and like, hey, I'm thinking about an idea, like it's called silly bands, animal shaped rubber bands. What do you think about it? I would have told them that's just fucking stupid. But like it just
Well,
goes to
I think they
show,
had the last laugh.
yeah, it just goes to show that you never know until you try. Like I'm a
Yeah.
firm believer now. Like don't count yourself out until you try, because you never know what happens. Like I would to this day never buy silly bands because I just don't see the value in it. But other people see the value in it. It is what it is. Anything else you want to
Yeah.
add, Kevin?
No, that's a funny story and definitely true. Like, I think sometimes a lot of people get caught up in like, I need to have a great idea. But honestly, you could have the greatest idea in the world. If your execution isn't there, you don't have a shot. So
Yeah.
I always say, like, it's better to try and fail and do that a bunch of times and get your, like, sharpen the muscle of execution than to try to wait months and months or years and years to have a great idea and then finally feel like you have one and now you have no idea what to do next. So yeah, totally a good point.
Oh, one last point because you mentioned that. So that same professor in that class, Jim, um, quick runaround by him. He started off at, like, I think as a financial investor, became rich, multimillionaire. And he told us a story. He became multimillionaire, spent it all, came broke, and then started his own businesses and got rich again. And this time he's going to spend his money more wisely, so he doesn't be like had that same fortune. But he told us that, like, hey man, like, and he's not the only entrepreneur that told me this. Like, you're gonna fail. I think Jim said he failed like 7, 8, or 9 times, maybe even 10 times, until he had one that hit and like changed his life. So it's okay to
Yep.
fail 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times. But he always told me, just don't get discouraged, because you'll eventually get one that hits. And this goes to show, me and Kevin, like, our first ventures didn't pan out, but
Yep.
we've actually gained a lot of, just from trying. We gained a lot of, like, okay, at least like we knew something about social media. Like, okay, so at least I know how to grow a social page. All right, I know how to engage. I know how to grow a following. Like creating things and like finding like things that work. So the next time you're not starting from zero. You're starting like maybe 10. You're starting from 15. You're starting from 20. If that makes sense.
1,000%.
So
Couldn't agree more.
with that being said, we're gonna get to the next question. So you're a full-time student in college, finance
Yeah.
major,
Yeah.
and you're running a business.
Yeah.
And if I were to say, like, I'm guessing we're like working like 50, 60 hours, maybe periodically, maybe a little bit more than that.
More
But
than
we
that.
were, we were busting our ass. Like, how did you manage all that?
I don't know. No,
Okay.
I look back at that time period, and um I was just so like inspired by what we were doing and the thought of like it
Mhm.
could possibly take off, that I mean, you might remember this, and I remember even just like times where you might have had a test the next day or something. Like, I was in a routine where I would get up at 7 in the morning, like go to our office and start working. And then, I'd eat a couple times, like maybe check if I had school, do that day. But I would stay till like 2 in the morning and be like, but like I wasn't tired or anything. Like I was like, oh crap, it's 2 in the morning. I should probably like get home. And I remember doing that for like months and months and months. And
Mhm.
at the end of the day, I feel like that's actually the one major component why we found success, is because we were just working harder than a lot of people. And it really built this edge for me, right? Like, we were in an office space that had several other businesses that were located there. And I was always the first one in and last one out. And it sounds so cliche, but it builds a level of confidence in you that you feel like you're able to sort of conquer everything that comes at you when you're putting the time in and putting in the work. So honestly, how I did it, I don't know. I always joke and say that I happen to be somewhat of a religious person, so I uh, I always thank the man above for like graduating, even though it sounds awful and probably something my mom doesn't want to hear.
Mhm.
But I my last semester, and I don't recommend doing this, but like the first time I would see the content that we were learning would be on the test. Like I don't recommend that. I didn't buy a book my last 2 years of college. Like, again, this is nothing that I would recommend. I just like, it just goes to show you where my priorities were. Now, don't get it twisted. Like, I did fine. Like, I graduated with 3.6 in finance, and like, I did okay. But I definitely, I think at the end of the day, like, whether it's entrepreneurship or like trying to just achieve your goals, time management is one of the most, if not the most important attribute to get down. And I had that down to a T. I knew exactly how much time it was going to take me to get a decent grade on the test or on the quiz or on my assignment or on the group project. And I only slotted in a lot of that time. And, I made sacrifices, right? Like, I didn't party a whole lot in college. I very seldom I sacrificed a lot of different things that maybe the normal college kid would do. And, in some ways I I think there are parts of me that would be interested to know what that would have been like, but I don't really regret it, because the experience that I had in developing what was Follow Spike for us, like, I wouldn't trade for the world, and I feel like gave me such an advantage when I graduated that I I mean, if I had to go back and do it again, I would have done it the exact same way.
That's crazy. Something I want to piggyback off, and I want to make a clear distinction because Kevin's gonna laugh. We not only worked harder than a lot of people because we were in this, long story short, we were in this like incubator program, part of our school, and there's a few people, like 10% of the people that are actually and actually worked hard, and like us, but we also like figured a way to execute efficiently, which is a huge difference. That I want to make clear. Like, it's one thing to work hard, but if you're not moving the needle, then like, what are you really doing? Like, you
I
gotta
always,
go ahead.
yeah, I was gonna say to that point, and we always used to laugh at this. There's a big difference between being busy and being productive.
Mm,
So
that's hard.
let that sink in. Like, I can definitely, and without like naming names, I can definitely think of people that like, and I think being busy is a accomplishment in itself, right? Like that means you're putting things in your plate and you are like, you have good work ethic, and like those are admirable traits and something everybody should have. But there's a difference between having stuff on your plate and getting stuff done. Like, and I don't just mean stuff that's like irrelevant, but like things that are actually going to move the needle. All we focus on was needle moving projects.
Mhm.
So I think that that was another major reason why we had success, is because even the few people that maybe did work as hard as us didn't move the needle as much as we were able to. And I think it's because they had their priorities and the wrong things when it came to what they were working on.
Agreed. Agreed. I guess to kind of piggyback off you, man. To be honest, I don't really know how I did it either. I don't. I kind of took the Nike slogan. I just made it happen. And was just, I think the passion drove me. Kind of like what you mentioned, like just I had to figure out a way to get it done. Basically, we both had to figure out a way to get it done. Even if we got a test next day or whatever, test next week, we would adapt, and then do what we had to do and get it done.
You know what I'll say on that too? Like, I think it takes a lot of self awareness too. Like, I mentioned this, but you have to know how you learn,
Mhm.
right? Like, I kind of knew for me that I would try not to skip classes because I knew that as I didn't have to be 100% paying attention to what was going on, but I knew that, like a podcast in a lot of ways, to bring this full circle, as long as it was in the background, I would actually retain a lot of the information. And a lot of my like friends and like old college mates know, like I wasn't the most attentive person in class, but I would score really well on tests and assignments and things like that. And a lot of it's because like, yeah, I did some brushing up, for major things like that. But it's because I was lucky enough to figure out that as long as I'm in the room and I can kind of like hear the conversation, see the development of what we're learning, it's not going to be completely foreign to me when I need to perform that information. And so that's my version, but you at home might be different. Like, I think you just have to reverse engineer how much time and the way you learn. And as long as you can figure that out and define it, it's going to be really easy for you to then carve out 5 hours, 20 hours, 40 hours, 80 hours into another thing.
That's true. I think just one last thing I want to mention is, and I kind of harped on this in a couple of my other videos, is freshman year of college me and I would say juniorish year of college me are two completely different things. Like Kevin Hart, like freshman year, I was like, I can't. It's almost like I went to school solely to like learn the college experience. Like like school was like fourth priority, right? But
You're
like
a maniac.
yeah. But to be fair, the environment opened that. Like I was in a
Yes.
hotel. I had a view. Um,
By the way, that's a whole story in itself.
yeah, like
This man's freshman year in college was literally at a hotel.
yeah, like there was like it was 8 floors of just like college students in the hotel because they ran out of space on campus. And on my side, there were two queen size bed, room service like 3 times a week. RA didn't care what we did. It was It,
It was a recipe for
I'm not
disaster.
gonna say what's that show? Oh man, what's that show? You know what it kind of reminded me of? Like Xing the sports. It was kind of similar to Blue Mountain State. I don't know if you ever watched that.
Oh yeah.
It
Yeah.
was
I mean,
kind
look, from the stories you tell me, like that's exactly how I picture it. Like
of
I almost, to go back to the whole universe will figure out the timing for you. If I had met you during that time period, I'm not sure we'd be here doing this this conversation because like you said, I think we were very different people in that time period.
yeah, but like kind of like what you mentioned, like I knew from the get, like, okay, I had my fun. Now it's time to get serious. Which a lot of people can't make that switch, but I was able to make that switch. And kind of like what Kevin, like sacrifices will have to be made. I remember like throughout building Fall Spike, like I barely went out. Like when I say barely, I mean like I barely went out. I was really just focused on school, business. Um, and like sacrifices are gonna have to be made. It's just what it is. But like with that being said, then let me get to my next point, which it seems like you might laugh at. So like I know Fall Spike is a lot different and it's probably a lot of different experience. You and I had a lot of different experience than a lot of other people in college. Like we had people working under us. We're feeding a baby at one time.
Well, we did not have a baby. Let's
No,
put
no,
that.
no, no, no,
We did not have a baby. Yeah.
no. One of our like team members was pregnant. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. No,
but
yeah.
go ahead.
No, I was gonna say that was a. I'm sure it might come up, but that was a very interesting time period for us.
Yeah, I was gonna say like what I guess my first question is what was like the day in the life of FS typically I guess that could change where whatever period it is. What was like kind of like a typical day in the life and then kind of like what you focused on, kind of like what I focused on.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of mentioned the timeline, right? Like, I would try to get up early, get my breakfast in. I'm really big on that.
Hmm.
Get my day started. If I could get a little workout in, and then I'd be in the office like 9, 10 o'clock and get to work. So whatever that was, right? Like in the beginning, like you're doing a little bit of figuring it out as you go, which by the way was like I've always been the kind of person, at least initially, I was always like perfection over speed. I've definitely changed my tune on that. I'm definitely speed over perfection guy now. And I really think Fallspike was the major change for that. And I think Carl say that because he's definitely a speed over perfection guy. But I think I ended up really learning what it took to figure out how to actually bring value to somebody. And I think that's constantly we were working on. So whether that was like building a better website, whether that was learning how to do what we were doing on Instagram, but and do it on other platforms, whether it was the kinds of businesses we wanted to work with and learning about their industries, whether it was figuring out how to actually sell somebody without any credibility or case studies on our end, how to sell a new concept, like what we should price yourself at. Like there was all these things that we had to like kind of make educated guesses on. And I think a lot of the initial days were just spent trying to answer questions in the best way we could and then adapting. Um, and then I think it gets to a place where the day in the life just kind of looks like moving the needle and however you can. And I think something that I try to do a better job of now is sort of providing structure around what that looks like. But if there was something I wanted to get done, you know me, I'm the kind of person I can be in front of my laptop for 11 hours and be like, oh crap, like it's been
Yeah.
11 hours. Like I don't really like leaving a project. Now I'm a little bit better at that, but I think a lot of the days were just like, hey, we need to get this done. Like, what part of it do you want to do? What part of it should I do? And try to play to our strengths as much as we could. And at the end of the day, look, when you're starting something, there's stuff that's fun and like you enjoy and is cool. And then there's stuff about it that isn't as fun or enjoyable. And I think it takes both to be able to have some success. So we just sort of shouldered all of the load together and eventually got to a place where we had team members working with us and for us. And trying to put them in positions of success, and bringing in people that were talented and passionate about those subject areas and have them flourish within those things. So it also allowed us time to do what, we needed to focus on the most. So, yeah, I mean, a day in life is a bit tough to define. I mean, it's literally like,
Yeah.
I always say, it was like the laptop lifestyle. I mean, I would take the laptop to the office or like the business building or a Starbucks or whatever, and I would just like get stuff done. Like, and I would every week have things. I mean, I actually still use it. I have it right here. I literally would write. In fact, if you really want to know, I could probably pull one up. But I would literally write like different things that I wanted to get done that week, and like conversations I wanted to have with people, new programs I wanted to instill, and yeah, and then at the end of the week, just try to cross them off. And then if I couldn't get it done, like move on to the next week and kind of go from there. So yeah,
Yeah.
there was a lot of just like goal setting and just at the end of the day, like trying to figure out how to move the needle. And I think some weeks we were great at it, some weeks we weren't as great at it, but I think the idea is we were just getting smarter as we went along.
To kind of piggyback over that, I think I I don't think it was a fair question. I like looked back on it because it was always changing and morphing. But in the beginning, I think I was more of the technical person, and you were more of the I guess like the design
I would
and
say
like the
creative, maybe.
creative mindset of it. And as time goes on, like we both kind of had like to morph, like, okay, now we had to balance like managing a team, like bringing, you know, what's funny, which a lot of people don't understand is, um, like Kevin and I were both very similar in that, like, we're not going to be fooled by anything. Like if FS for whatever reason, if within like the first like 4 months, like we didn't see anything, it would have been scratched. All right, we good luck, good run. But I remember like I think it was the first like 2 weeks when we officially launched. I went to get like to buy some shoes at this shop, and I was literally like just talking to the guy that runs the shop, and I just mentioned like, oh, like he asked me like, oh, I seen you around a couple of times, like how's it going? You go to USF? I'm like, yeah, yeah. And then I mentioned social media, and he's like, oh, really? And then like that actually like that was like the first incline of like us like potentially getting deals. And the thing that's funny is, which is definitely a bad thing that I look back on it, but Kevin and I like rarely ever sold. Like in terms of like a lifespan, like of a business, you're supposed to be selling like 100% of the time. I would say at max we were selling like 30% of the time. Like it's kind of funny. You might correct me if I'm wrong in terms of that analogy, but like we were not selling a lot during FS
Yeah,
or
I
like
think
outreach.
initially, yeah, I think initially that's something that if I had to go back and change some things, it's probably something I would have done is like input a higher priority on like just solely sales. And it
Mhm.
wasn't that we weren't selling, it was that I think we were very obsessed with the idea of like building the machine. We used to talk about this a lot. And so from like a professionality standpoint and the website and the packaging and like the product and the service and the follow-up emails and like the whole chain of it was super well done. I mean, super well done. We had multiple, like some of our first clients were like, wow, this is like really well put together, and we had no idea what we were doing, so it like meant a lot to us. um, but I think we probably could have invested some of that time into sales and probably could have seen better results from a financial standpoint, at least in the beginning.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, those are some of the things that you learn as you go, and I think we eventually did, and then we put more kind of time and resources and finances into the sales process, and that ended up like having its benefits and its fruits. So
Yeah.
yeah, I definitely agree with you, and I think a lot of it was organic initially, even down to that shoe company. Like you weren't even the mindset of selling, but like, as the phrase always goes, like if you're an entrepreneur, you're always selling, and I'm a big believer in that. So yeah, I definitely think that's accurate.
Speaking of that, like, because what's kind of funny is like when we were in college, we got to a point where like money talk was way different between us and a typical college student. Um, I heard I think you told me a story about like how you slipped, tripped, like fell into like a 25K deal. Like, how did that happen? How did that happen?
I'm actually trying to remember which one. Wait,
How did
wait,
that
no, I'm
happen?
not trying to be cocky. I'm really trying to ask which one you're referring
Um,
to.
the um, the government contractor.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, I mean, you were a big part of that. Um, so if I remember correctly, there was just like one of these networking events that was happening maybe on campus or
Yep.
around Tampa.
Yep.
And
Yep.
we try to go to as many of those as possible just to learn, maybe meet people and whatever, right? For that one, I remember I couldn't go for whatever reason, and you still went, and you basically were sitting next to some guy, right? And you guys kind of hit it off, and we're just chatting about,
Do you want me to
him and what
tell
he,
that portion?
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
was
You're
there.
gonna know way better than me.
Yeah. So I was in class and I was doing this group project for, I think it was a management class. And one of the guys that was in my team was like a head, wasn't, I think he was the head or like one of the major figures in the a sales team on school. And he kind of just told me like, hey man, like we're having this like kind of like this like resume pitch thing tomorrow. You should really just like go and check it out. And I'm always a believer in like, what's the worst thing that can happen? The worst thing I can do is just network, and if nothing happens, nothing happens. So what's funny was um, I was completely unprepared for whatever it was. Like I'm talking about like it was less than 24 hours I had to go. And these people,
You didn't even have a business card, I don't
you know,
think.
I didn't even have a business card. And these people, like, apparently, I figured out the day of, like, they were like prepping for this for like at least a month almost. And there was like several rows of like you across from like an employer, and then you would just move each seat, and you would kind of like pitch yourself to an employer, and they would critique you on how you pitch yourself. And I was literally like just like lost. I'm like, oh man, I'm really not. I really not prepared for this. What I get myself into. And I was like, I got to the seat of this guy named Jim, and I was just like pitching like nonchalantly. And then like once it wrapped up, or like it was wrapping up, I actually started pitching myself in terms of like because he asked me something about like, oh, what do I do right now? And I'm like, oh, I'm actually doing the social media agency. It's called, and I like my tonality, my energy just like shifted. And he's like, that's funny. Like we're literally in the process of like trying to do something like that. Do you have a card or anything? So I didn't have a card on me. So what I did was I asked for his card. I made sure that I asked for his card before he left because something was just telling me like I have to get his information before I leave. Like I can't let him leave out his information. So while he was leaving, I was like, hey Jim, can I just get your card? Emailed him same day, and then it turns out like that company was doing like I think almost they were doing like either 7 or 8 figures. I don't remember exactly, but they were a local company doing a lot of money. And Kevin can kind of like tell you like moving forward how that went, but it just goes to show like you just never know who you're gonna meet.
Yeah. So, I mean, just to sort of take the baton, you kind of call me and tell me, hey, I just had this interesting conversation. I'm going to follow up with them, blah, blah. That ends up becoming a meeting for us. We meet the CMO. It's sort of a candid conversation, but we come prepared. We come dressed up. We come with like a presentation ready. We come with like ideas and concepts and whatever. Um, and he didn't say no. And our mindset was like, well, let's force him to say no, right? And he didn't say
Yeah.
no. And he was like, all right, well, come in and like price it out for me. What's it going to look like? What can I expect? And look, at the same time, I mean, at that point, we had some clients, but none at this level. I mean, this company was doing like 30 million in annual revenue, and they had locations in every state. So we had not worked with a company. I mean, a lot of what we were doing was like the shoe shop near the college, or like a nonprofit initially that we were working with, or like a lot of local focused stuff for smaller things, right? And
Mhm.
this was our first like opportunity into something a little bit more serious or corporate. So yeah, so what ended up happening was we sort of met with them over a series of meetings, probably 4, 5, or 6. Like it took way longer than we wanted.
Yeah.
Um, and just kept pitching. And we didn't know if it was gonna really follow through, but we thought we had a shot, and they hadn't told us no. And we got to the CEO and built a good relationship with him. And I remember the moment I closed the deal, I actually went on a little family vacation. I was in Key West, and I'll never forget. So I was like, it was like this, where we were on a call, and I had my sort of like my nice collared shirt on the top and a bathing suit on the bottom. And it's funny because they called me out because I told them that I was going to be in the hotel in Key West, and they were like, "Are you wearing board shorts under there?" And I'm like, "You got me." And I like joked that I wasn't, but I really was. So yeah, it's just funny how like, you go from doing the super like serious sort of corporate investment strategy to like literally ended up closing the deal like maybe a couple months later on the near the pool. So anyways, yeah, really pivotal experience for us, and like we were able to close something that sort of opened our eyes to, whoa, this could really work.
Yeah.
And ended up pitching them for like a 3-month contract, ended up doing much longer than that. Um, and it was a really successful operation. I think one major takeaway that I have from that experience is like, and I admit a couple of people gave us good advice on this. Like we were scared because we didn't know this was like a very intricate client. They were like sold to mostly the government, but also like B2B, and they were like a technology back end services company. It was very
Mhm.
difficult to like make sexy, and and you need a little bit of flair when it comes to social, at least it helps. So, and none of their competitors really were on social media, so we had nothing to base it off of. And so I kind of just sold them, or we sold them on the concept of, look, we don't know if this is going to be like how successful this can be. All we know is our opportunity here to differentiate you guys from your competition in this space is very real, because none of your
Yeah.
competition is properly investing in this. And if you were to do this with us, we'd be able to turn this around for you, and have you guys basically be an industry leader in from a digital and social standpoint. And that's exactly what we did. Within about 4 or 5 months, they had the top social media presence in that category in the country.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, look, I think transparency is really big, and something that I learned from that specific client, as well as sometimes, this is something that I think about now a lot, but sometimes like if you go into something like, don't, and I'm analytical in a lot of ways. Like I graduated a finance degree, as we talked about. Like I'm thinking about like all these different scenarios. Sometimes I go into something, I'm like, what if it turns out better than we could ever imagine? And I think that's kind of what happened.
For sure.
um
We should have never
so
got them.
never
We
got
should
that.
have
Yeah.
never got that.
1,000%. Now, it wasn't like there wasn't challenges, right? Like it took us months to close the deal. There was a lot of back and forth of things that we didn't know. We had to send them a contract, and we didn't have much legal help. Like there was a lot of things that we had to figure out on the fly. But at the end of the day, we ended up getting more than we even wanted, and ended up also being able to deliver. I think that was another huge like confidence boost for us of like, hey, this was something that we had no idea we were doing, and we still figured it out. So there's no reason why every single brand or business that we encounter, we can't pitch our talent to help what they're doing.
But yeah, to kind of piggyback off of that is a well, at least for me personally, I think Kevin could attest to this. Like after like we closed them, that was like the first time I'm like, okay, this is real. Like and we like kind of like he mentioned, like we had some clients already, but none of them were paying us like that in the beginning. And I was just like, yo, we just got a check for this much. So now I'm just thinking like it was already like a business because we were making cash. Like once you start making cash flow, you're a business, in my opinion, or you're in business, I should say. But now, like, once you start like hitting like from like we have this analogy where we call it small fishes and then whale clients. We hit our like first quote unquote, at least in Florida, I would consider that a whale client.
For sure.
Um, and that was like okay, that was like when you knew like okay, we got something here. That was the moment I'm like okay, this is like the beginning. This is like the spark of like something like what we've been building up to. It's validated now. And I literally from that point, like I think it ignited us even further because like we got one, we're like, okay, well, can we get how many can we get? You know, it was that kind of mentality um, of like just trying to get will clients. Um, but with that being said, then like obviously, like we just kind of mentioned, that was a great moment. But like as you may know, FS, there was a lot when it was high, it was high, and when it was low, oh man, it was low. Like, can you
Oh
talk
yeah.
about the pros and cons, or like the highs and lows of just building it up?
Yeah. Just like we have, like, I remember some of the lower moments. I mean, you hit it on the head, which is why in the very beginning I talked about a support system is huge. I don't know if we even talked about this, but just to get a little personal again. So a couple months later, we had another whale opportunity. It was with this, like, I think roofing company, and we were basically gonna replace their like TV budget. So you can imagine it was a serious opportunity.
Math.
Yeah, and I think that was a really interesting learning lessons because I hit it off with the CEO, like talked to him for like 2 hours in his
You had a
office.
warm lead for that one, actually.
Yeah, and it's funny that it was like kind of through a referral. So yeah, that was an interesting like opportunity. And then we had a second meeting where you were there as well, and we hit it off again, and literally got a verbal agreement. And to at the time,
Handshake,
like,
like
yeah, handshake, like excited to work with you, like this is gonna be great, like all of that. And we left there, we were psyched. I mean, it was also during like a very pivotal time for us as a company, and it was just going to allow us to like invest in things we've been wanting to, like bring on more people, like all these things that it would like that deal alone is going to allow us to do. um
yeah,
and then
to kind of give them kind of like a time frame, or not a time frame, but just like more in depth into it. Like when we talk about like that was a massive opportunity, we mean like that one client had the potential to do like the contract would have been, I think, near six figures just from that one client. I don't remember
yeah,
exactly the terms because it was a while ago, but it would have been like near six figures just from one client. Like that's what we're
yeah,
talking about, massive.
and with like opportunity to grow.
Yeah,
And another one of those things where like we felt confident that even if we did an okay job, it would still be successful. So it's just like a really good opportunity from that standpoint. But
yeah.
I brought this up because it was ended up being a low. And so what ended up happening was a giant miscommunication with the CEO's assistant and me and the CEO, and ended up being this, like I said, giant misunderstanding. They thought I asked for something that I didn't ask for. They took it the wrong way. They were like, we told you we didn't want to, supply you that information, or, are you trying to scam us? Like there was all these, I was like, no, like not at all. Like, and it was one of those learning experiences where sometimes, I know it sounds so insane because it's a little bit backwards, but if you're told to do something, sometimes it's good just to do that, because I actually was trying to go a little bit above and beyond, and that's what ended up biting me in the ass. Um, and so we ended up losing out on that deal. And I vividly remember that day was pretty crushing because, and this is my fault, and I always used to say and still say, a deal's not a deal until the money's transacted and the return date has been passed. That's how you know a deal's a deal. So that had not happened yet. We got the verbal agreement. We were sending over the contracts. They had not been signed yet. And it was a good learning experience. And what I will say is I actually am happy that happened because A, of the learning experience, but B, I understood that if that amount of miscommunication and like negative dialogue happened without finances involved, I can't imagine what it would have been like to have to serve that client with so much finances involved. So I'm
Mm.
actually very happy. I couldn't tell you that at the time, but I'm very happy that that didn't happen. And it was a huge learning experience. And so, yeah, I mean, look, to talk about the highs and lows, that's why I consider you one of my brothers. Like we went to war together. I think a lot of entrepreneurship is just like sort of being in the foxhole. And if you're gonna have people go in the foxhole with you, you want it to be people that you can trust and you like can depend on and can pick you up when you're down and vice versa. So I think there's a lot of those moments, and we had a lot of candid conversations about what we want in life and what we're willing to sacrifice for it. And I feel like it does take that level of vulnerability in order to see the other side. Um, but I'll say this too, like I think everybody's wired a little differently, but there's nothing like the feeling of achieving success when you're doing it for yourself or you're starting something yourself. Because what I'll say is like, whenever we got a sale or like a client got a customer because of us, or, they reached 20,000 followers or whatever it was, I,
You were never
uh,
happier.
yeah, because not only for yourself, but also I was so happy for you. And then obviously for the client, and I'm also so happy for the team, right? Because we ended up having like, I think we had like 9 people working for us while we were still in school, which is
Yeah.
insane. And like most of them paid, right? Like most of them, like that's when you were talking about earlier, like somebody that we were, had contracted, we actually didn't know of initially, but she was pregnant, and we were kind of like, we were funding a baby, and ends up being a whole nother conversation when she started not performing. And then we're put in this like weird spot at such a young age of, doing sort of like the right thing and doing like morally and with the business. And so, a lot of those things like you don't think about, but then you're thrown into the situation, and that's what sort of separates winners and losers. So, yeah, I mean, look, I think there is a lot of high highs and low lows. You have to be an even keeled person. I always say like expect the worst and hope for the best, and then you know like be happy for your wins, but don't over celebrate, and reflect on your losses, but don't uh don't you no need to get down. No need to stay that way. I think every day set up kind of a new day. And I think once we figured that out, I think we were able to like really push forward. And a lot of, I mean, look, what I'll say too is like from a con standpoint is entrepreneurship is lonely
Yeah.
because we're sitting there by ourselves. Like, I mean, I can't imagine how much more lonely it would have been had we not done it together. Um, because at least we had somebody to confide with, bounce off ideas, and like celebrate with. If I was doing that 1,000% by myself, I think it'd be a lot harder, and I identify with people that have to go through that. Which is why I think at the end of the day, like you need to understand like why you're doing what you're doing, and that needs to be the driver. Start with your why and kind of move from there, and eventually everything else will kind of fall into place. And what I will say too is if you're doing a business just for money, I think it's tough to be successful long term. And I think that's even in some cases like something we figured out is you have to really be passionate about what you're doing, and that has to be the driver. And as long as that's the case, it's always going to be easy to be authentic and easy for things to eventually come in your direction, because people will gravitate toward those who are passionate about what they're doing.
I agree, man. I agree. I think it's, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's safe to say that, like, especially being so young, that taking that leap of faith, not just for FS, but I guess like taking the entrepreneurial leap of faith has been very pivotal in your life.
The most pivotal. The most pivotal. To be honest, um, I work on some pretty cool projects now. But I don't think anything for a long time is going to compare to the delta or the amount of growth that happened, especially like those initial periods of fall spike. Like, um, just the amount of like confidence I was able to build in myself, the mistakes I was able to learn from, the people I was able to meet, the skills I was able to build. Um, I just, I mean, I think confidence was like a very big thing. I've always been a confident person, but once I started achieving success for myself, I was able to understand like that I felt very invincible, even though I knew I wasn't, but I felt like if I really put my mind to something, I could do it. And I think that is super empowering. So yeah, I mean, look,
You
yeah,
feel like Thanos
I,
with the gauntlet.
I know, like, I mean, it's true. Like like I said, I'm going to be very surprised if I reflect on something when I'm 96 years old and on my deathbed. Like, I'm going to be surprised if I look back at anything, especially from a professional standpoint, that moves the needle as much as Fall Spike did, because I was just able to learn so many things at such a young age, managing people, like building these skills, having clients, serving people, having to deal with mistakes, like regretting things, doing things better, like being fast at stuff, like speed over perfection. Yeah, just so many different concepts that I don't, like I said, I wouldn't trade it for the world. And I think, like, in my opinion, any young person should start a business, no matter what it is, no matter if there's a
Mhm.
financial opportunity involved or not. Um, Especially if you're a business major. I mean, I think it's ludicrous if you don't. That's my opinion, but yeah. So I mean, my short answer is 1000% yes. It's like I still reflect on that time period as the most pivotal time of my life, and I think it'll be like that for a while.
Yeah, that's crazy, man. Kind of like what you mentioned to kind of like sum this up, like take a leap of faith. I remember like before starting at Fest, like I was working at this like just this random seasonal job. It was actually I think it was Perriel's, just like suits. And when we like agreed um to like start it and like I actually like filed the LLC and stuff. Which, by the way, the only reason we knew how to file an LLC is because in the past I figured out how to file it by myself. Like cons of like trying things out. But I remember when we agreed on it, I remember I was so happy. I'm like, oh, I'm about to leave this fucking job, man. I'm ready to start this. And you really got like if you're like I mentioned before, you're in a position like us, like you really have nothing to lose. Um, I remember I went to the dean one time of our like college of business, and I really just went there one to connect with him, like kind of network with him. And he we never met each other, and he was like, "Oh, like how's everything going? Like I see your GPA is good. And like tell me about have you done any internships?" And I told him specifically, which like it was he mentioned it like it was one of the most pivotal things he's ever heard because no one's ever told him that. I'm like, yeah, I'm not gonna lie to you, man. I haven't taken any internships, but I think I've said something like I've hired like 2 or 3 of your students or something like that. And he was just like mind blown of that concept. He invited me to this like he actually invited me to this right after this was like right after he invited me to this like dinner with like all the like the top like 3.9 or above like students and shouted me out on it and things like that. But like you just have nothing to lose really. If you fail, you fail. Just make sure you use your failures to your advantage. Like learn from your failures. So like you next time, you get something out of it. But hopefully like that kind of sums up everything I wanted to talk about so far today, man. Kevin's my brother, man. Hopefully he's brought a lot of value to you in terms of this like interview. Do you have anything else you want to like sum up, kind of like tips, maybe hacks, anything?
Follow me at Kevin Fedor on Instagram. No, I'm kidding. No, I mean, yeah, no, like I said, thank you so much for having me on. You know me, I'm excited to reflect on these moments and chat about them, and if I could provide value, would love to do so. So yeah, I mean, I was joking, but yeah, feel free to connect with me on social, wherever else. Like if you are interested or want to learn more, or have questions about our story, or want to introduce yourself, feel free. I love doing that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think that's one thing. And like you said, you're my brother. I can't, I look at our experiences together very fondly, and I know we still have a lot of stuff cooking for the future. So I hope that doesn't change. But super excited for a lot of stuff you're working on right now, and happy to be a small part of it.
Of course, man. Thank you so much for this. Everyone, if you have any questions, like leave a like, comment, please subscribe to the channel. We're going to have more like valuable interviews like this, more valuable content just in general. But with that being said, like thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.
Peace.